Welcome to Uncopyable Women in Business. I'm your host, Kay Miller, also known as Muffler Mama. Stay tuned as I, along with my guests, give you marketing, sales, and personal branding strategies that will give you an uncopyable advantage. Today, I am here with Alyson Van Hooser, who is an inspirational speaker on leading the future of work and the author of Infinite Influence and Level Up. Alyson, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Kay. I'm looking forward to digging into our topic today.
I have to mention we are both Sound Wisdom authors, and we did get to meet in person a couple of years ago, and you are a pistol girl. What can I say? You are on a mission to empower leaders to succeed, especially in the complex post-pandemic workforce. And one of the things that you have going for yourself is that you have an interesting and very challenging background. And as we talked about right before we went on, some people use the challenges such as you faced as an excuse to not do things. And some take it as inspiration to change the world. And that's what you are doing and have done. Geez, you've been in management roles at Walmart, leadership positions in the financial industry, city council member. The list goes on, and you're just barely 30.
I feel like I'm almost closer to 40 now, Kay, but I really appreciate all those kind comments.
Yes, you're closer to 30. That's what I'm going to say. I'd love to have you share, first of all, with your listeners, with my listeners, our listeners will say, about what that background is and what you've had to overcome and achieve.
I think it's interesting that you bring up my background first, because it is because of my background that I have landed here today, specifically in that I have been with my husband since I was 16 years old. And from early on, I was invited to go on family vacations with them. I got to know them incredibly well. And for years, my father-in-law, now business partner, would tell me in one-off comments here and there, almost consistently, once or twice a year, he would say, I feel like you've got a story that would help a lot of people. How you responded, I think, would help a lot of people. And so I think that affected me to my core, which is why I chose to do things like run for city council. But I came to a point where when I was finishing up my term as a city councilwoman, I was trying to figure out, what's next. And what I knew is that at 28 years old, I had 3 kids at the time, and I had a full-time job in the financial industry. And I was doing the city council position. I was volunteering in the community, volunteering at church. And I was just at a point where I needed to make a firm decision on how I was going to move forward for the next 30 years of my career, 35 years. And I was either going to go all into politics, hoping to make a difference there. I was going to put my name in the hat, run for mayor. I had to do that by August 30th or something like that. Or I was going to forego politics and just go all into my career. And I called Phil. Phil has basically filled the father role of my life since I was, that teenager. I came home one day when I was 13 years old from a babysitting job, and I go to open the front door and it's locked. I ended up crawling through a window and walking around the house and realizing that my dad, my brother, my sister, they had left. And I was alone, and that would be the story for the rest of my life, for the rest of my childhood. And I think whenever I was coming to that sort of fork in the road, I called Phil and I'm like, I've got 24 hours before I need to make a decision. What am I going to do next? What do you think I should do? And he just said, very simply and very casually, not in an extremely compelling way, he just said, Alyson, it's very clear to me, and I've been telling you this since you were a little girl, I think that you were meant to do this work. I think you could help a lot of people. And I had heard that dozens of times before, but I remember walking around in a parking lot just pacing. And as he said that, it sort of my mind became this Rolodex of as the Lord saying to me, I didn't give you all these experiences for nothing. they weren't just for you. There's lessons you learn. There's other people who are struggling with very similar things. I'm not incredibly unique. I wasn't the first person to do any sort of world-changing event or career, but what I do know is that I'm not the only person who has experienced challenges like mine. And regardless of how different our stories might be, some of the lessons that I've learned apply to every area of our life and the human experience. So we can dive deeper into that. But I think looking back over my life, I'm just someone who's always been looking for my purpose. And I've never felt more like I'm walking in that today.
Right. And I do recommend that you buy the most recent book, which is Infinite Influence. And you talk more about your story. There is more to that story, of course. And you also have Level Up as your first book. You happen to also have these situations that worked for you. So as bad as some of the challenges were when you were a kid, you fall in love with this guy whose father is a Hall of Fame speaker, has written many books, also has just such a positive personality. And I know you have a great relationship. So you've really been served an interesting deck of cards through your life, huh?
I would say that's absolutely true. And I would say if we will all stop and intentionally look around, who do we know? What have we been through? What have we achieved? I think we'll get clues into what we should do or think or act on next. Yeah, and I will say one other thing about that. I think one of the blessings of growing up the way that I did, Kay, was that I didn't have a silver spoon in my mouth. I had to fight for everything. And so the fact that I did meet Joe in high school PE class, the fact that this is what his father did, and I could come into the business and he could recommend me to clients who wildly trusted him and would give me a chance right off the bat. I do not take that for granted for a second. It's why I'm so involved in the National Speakers Association Kentucky chapter. I'm doing everything I can to get back and pay it forward. And I think that has made it all feel worthwhile and made me feel even more gracious for the opportunities that I've had.
And you do have a great personality for this. You're so positive and bubbly and really are authentic. And we talked a little bit about personal branding, of course, because Steve and I just co-wrote a book on personal branding. And you are genuine and authentic. And if you're listening to this interview and you think that Alyson is some type of Pollyanna, no, she really is. She walks the talk. Alyson, I just really admire you for that. You really are invested in helping leaders. And especially in this last book, you want to motivate and influence someone versus manipulating them. So I would like you, because I think everyone listening, we're all in a position to want to influence someone, whether we are trying to get our husband and our kids choose a certain restaurant, or we are making any kind of decision. We're trying to sell a product or service. We are trying to sell our vision or start a church. You talked about church. Really, you have to sell a vision. And you have to do that by influencing. And people don't change because you're trying to make them change. They have to do that from the inside out. So talk about, how do you create that scenario where people do want to make the change and see that value?
I think when you're talking, as I'm listening to you say that what comes to my mind is something that I often say when I first meet a group. And it's that people that will hear my story or read my bio, and they've said things before like, she's a self-made success. And so I start right off the bat and say, it's just not true. And I don't believe there's any such thing as self-made success. I don't believe that you can just grind it out in order to get what you want. I think one of the key drivers in you being able to achieve quite literally anything is your ability to connect with other people. And when you realize that from the very beginning and you spend time working to think like someone else, then you equip yourself to walk into a room and be able to connect so that both of you can move forward in a way that's good for them, good for you, and good for who you're trying to affect going forward. Very simply, it's something that I find interesting. I would be interested if you have had the same experience with your books. So I've written 2 books so far, and I've co-authored another one with Phil. And what I found is that book consumes your life for about 6-month period. For some people, it's longer, some people, it's shorter. But for me, each one took about 6 months. You live it, you breathe it, you write it down. But I wrote Infinite Influence, 3 or so years ago. And I'm much more wise at 35 than I am at 33. And so even taking the Infinite Influence message, working through it with companies, managers, supervisors, salespeople, etc., working through that with them, I've been able to distill it down and make it even more simple. And so now when I'm teaching Infinite Influence, I say it's really incredibly simple. You ask, do you do that? See the story, serve the need. See the story, serve the need. And I say, first, see the story, because what I know is that our human experiences shape what we want going forward as adults. So what we want from our goals, what we want from how we work, who we work with, how we want to be communicated with, how we want to receive bad news, etc. And so with that in mind, I talk about hands down the number one best way to get to learn someone's paramount need, which is absolutely key to the Infinite Influence strategy, is to intentionally get to know their personal stories so that you can, as I said this a moment ago and you said this before our call, so that you can think like them, because you should never communicate by shooting from the hip or flying off the lip. It should be planned. And the more you develop the skill of empathy, which is not understanding people, it's you being able to put it into action. The more you develop that, the more it becomes natural and very quick. And I always use a story to illustrate that. You remember the teacher story in that book, Kay?
Yes, I sure do. And I love that story, so please share it.
I'll have to give the shortened version of it. But when you talk about in your book, the big idea, which I think is just absolutely brilliant. When you talk about the big idea, I'm sitting there thinking, what have I done that would allow me to check that box that Kay says that if I want to be more successful, I need to check? And as I'm thinking back over our business, one of the things that I do before I ever send any message, go in depth into content, is I do what I call redefining leadership. So the big idea is that we need to basically would define it like this. Leadership is not position, which means I'm talking about every single one of us showing up and being intentional about how we impact people. That's a big idea. I finished that third part of the definition saying that leadership is the ability to serve the need and the choice to take action. And I'll play off of something else that you said in your book, which is just eye-opening for me. If you have not read the book, because where you say stealing genius, in that part of the leadership definition where I say a leadership is the ability to serve the need. What we know is that way back in the 1900s, servant leadership, especially at work, became incredibly popular. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody's trying to practice it. If I'm in an audience of 2 or 10,000 and I ask, who in here believes in servant leadership? Everybody's going to raise their hand. When it comes to stealing genius, I'm looking at the people who had been seen as some of the most bright people in our world, the biggest thought leaders, and I'm thinking, what are they missing in the future of work? And what I know now, without a doubt, is that good intentions are not good enough. We have to be more focused than ever. What do we focus on? We got to focus on the paramount need, what is absolutely most important to them in the moment, because once we tick that box, they can move on to a lower level need, which is what you want to accomplish with them. Whether it's at work, you want them to engage. If it's a customer, you want them to buy. You might have to meet some other needs first in order to get there. But you don't know the next right step if you don't understand what their paramount need is.
Okay, let's stop right there because I have an offer for you. As you know, Steve and I have written a brand new personal branding book called Uncopyable You, because your personal brand is what sets you apart. I've put together a 5-part email series called Building a Profitable Personal Brand, and it's totally free. It will help you get way closer to building and crafting an intentional personal brand that will level up your success. Go to beuncopyable.com/5-emails. I'll put that link in the show notes.
Very quickly, that teacher story. I always say it's a story about a teacher, sure, but it's really a story about a leader, okay? Someone who chose to see the need and take action. Ms. Conger, if I could paint a picture of her for you, she's 5'3" on a good day, crystal blue eyes, curly brown hair. I remember thinking she was so beautiful. I remember thinking her classroom smelled like red Starburst. I remember everything, and that was 25 years ago. And it's because She was a person who was just showing up and was laser focused on serving people the way they needed to be served before we moved forward together. So I always say her paramount need was to be a successful teacher. And in order for her to be a successful teacher, she needed students to learn, grow, and test well. The challenge was in third grade, I was not showing up to school to learn, grow, and test well. I was showing up to school for free food and safety. I didn't know if I had dinner at home. We didn't have enough money, and any place was better than what I knew at home in that environment. And so I'd set an alarm and I'd just go to school every day, but I'm sitting in class and I'm not paying attention. And I always position that from an influence standpoint. Like, how many people do you interact with, do you cross paths with, that they're no help to you achieving greater success? And maybe they're no help to themselves either. And that becomes where we start finding our purpose, helping other people where they are. And so very simply, we don't have time for all the details, but very simply, Ms. Conger gets to know our story in a very strategic way. She ends up asking if she can fix my hair for picture day. I said, yes, couldn't wait. Thought that picture was going to change my life because back in the day, yearbooks were a reference document.
It's a bit real.
To know who mattered, who looked pretty, who looked fixed up. I just thought that would change my life. But long story short, I ended up messing the hair up. I get to school. She meets me with the big old hug. I remember she said, Alyson, you look so beautiful, which was a lie. I know what I look like. She lied. Leaders shouldn't lie. We'll deal with that in another episode. But I remember in that moment thinking, my story was that I didn't have a mom around. Nobody was paying attention to me. If I didn't know that anybody even cared. I'm just trying to get by. And when she was hugging me in that hallway, I remember thinking, I wonder if this is love.
Wow.
Maybe she does care about me. And it wasn't until she took that action that was unorthodox, that had nothing to do with her job, that I'm standing there and I thought, I didn't think I wanted a family when I grow up. But now I have a husband and 4 kids. Quite literally 4 more people walk this earth because of the action of one person. The other thing that I decided, which is where infinite influence becomes powerful for both parties, is before that interaction, I was no help to her achieving greater success. But after that, I made a conscious decision that, you know what? If she cares about me, I'm going to care about her. I'm going to pay attention in class, do my homework, try to be gifted and talented, make her proud. And you know what? That was good for me too, at the end of the day. And I'm just a firm believer that when you serve the need and you choose to take the action, whether you feel like you should have to, you don't want to, someone else should step up, I'm just a believer that you have the power to change lives. And in Ms. Conger's words, she would say, that's when all the work is worth it, when you truly make a difference in someone's life. So I use that to illustrate every single point that we make, whether we're talking about employee retention, engagement, handling hard conversations, setting expectations, because it's not really the key to success. I'll go back to is your ability to understand people in a really diverse workforce. It's tough and it takes intentional time and effort and energy and maybe even organizational restructuring, but the people who do it, they continue to reap success time and time again. And I just want that for more people. Okay, I probably talked way too much, but
There's a lot to unpack there, but you make so many valid points. And when I think of your teacher, if she hadn't made that decision to help you, so yes, she's paying attention, but how many times do we have that option, that possibility to really influence someone? Say kind words maybe that you don't even know. We all have stories. We all have our challenges, ups and downs. And so it's just a great reminder to take advantage of those opportunities. And I'm sure, I don't know if she knows what a difference that she made in your life. But if we all did that, you talk about infinite influence. When you influence someone, they influence someone else. There's a ripple effect. And just hearing those words, Alyson, you look beautiful. And you guys have to read the book because the story is very comical. Like she said, by the time the picture day rolled around, Alyson had successfully ruined this beautiful hairdo. It really wasn't about the hairdo. It was about the care that she took and the empathy. Like you said, as I said before we recorded, a lot of people say, understand what the other person is thinking. But you take it a step further, which is unique, and say, think like the other person is thinking. And that's hard to do. We all have, and you talked about this, our life and experience and your heuristics, what your experience, but to step out of that and really get into someone else's head. And you know what? As a customer or a buyer or the person being influenced, we can tell, right? We can tell if that's genuine.
Such a good point. Yes, absolutely.
So,
You make a good point. I go back to that Infinite Influence book that I didn't know this when I started writing the book, but there are books written on influence that are banned from prisons. Maybe you know that already.
No, I didn't know that. Tell me more.
I think it's because although people are today, especially in the workforce, incredibly diverse, people are wildly complex, they can still be figured out. Which is why I know this infinite influence strategy works. It's worked for my whole life and it works for my clients. They send me the stories. But because it's so powerful, I say, you better pay attention. There's actually a warning page in that book because if you choose to build infinite influence this way, that is a responsibility. We're not playing.
I know you. I remember you had the big caution sign and say, hey, yes, you do have a responsibility if you're making this decision because it affects people's lives. And I know your personal brand, we talked about personal branding.
Yeah.
Yours really is genuine. You said one of your skills. I love the story about you talking with your husband and reading a letter from your father who has been in and out of rehab, etc. And your husband said, I don't think I've ever met anyone as empathetic as you are. So it is a natural skill, but then you've taken that to the next level and used that to affect leadership and affect business people and affect people personally. That empathy really is so important. And when you create your personal brand, you use the word intentional. I totally believe that. Don't just let things happen. Decide who you want to be, like you have, and what you want to do, the imprint you want to make on the world. And like you said, you have 4 kids now. Obviously, you are molding little humans and making that impact on them. That's obviously so important.
Okay, can I flip the tables on you a little bit?
You can. You totally won't.
What you just mentioned was so empathy being almost instinct to me, natural for me, but I've figured out how to teach other people to develop that skill. I wonder if you're thinking about uncopyable you, what you would have to, how you would speak to assessing what do I know? What am I naturally capable of doing? Because there may be some skill in there that is really difficult for other people, but because it's unique to you, because you'll already have the stories, you can use that to be uncopyable. What do you think about that?
Oh, I totally agree. I think we take what is unique and powerful about ourselves for granted. We think everyone, any type of teaching, they say you don't need to know everything. You need to know 10% more than your audience does. So really digging down into analyzing who you are, what is uncopyable, what your vision, your purpose is, that really is the place to start. Because as I said, you're authentic, you're genuine, and you can't just fake it. Again, people can smell a rat, right? Oh, no. And think of yourself as how you want to be treated. It's the old golden rule. And you talk about Dale Carnegie and how he made people feel special, and it wasn't really that difficult. It's not super difficult. Listening, being interested, putting yourself in your, again, we call it your moose, your target market, whoever you want to influence, right? You want to, and again, not only empathize with them, but think like them, which again, I think that's the most challenging part of all because, okay, right now we're in a political environment. It's very hard to see how the other side is thinking. And I've challenged myself to do that. I look at everything and I think, okay, there's more than one way to see the world. And so that's really a challenge. But again, that is the best way to serve people. And manipulation doesn't work. It might work once. Again, there's a funny story in the book about setting your clocks ahead 10%, or not 10%, 10 minutes ahead. And again, your kids immediately found out what you were trying to do. And it's maybe a silly little story, but it really does represent a whole lot more. So I don't know if that answered your question. Like you said, we've got so much to talk about in just a few more minutes, but
Yeah.
I think you've made some great points. And thinking about our listeners, and they
Yes.
might be in sales or sales management, they might be entrepreneurs, business owners, but no matter whether you're trying to find a job or any of the other things I mentioned, you need to be influential. So how would you wrap this up for our listeners and give them some, maybe an action step or two that they
Yeah.
can take right away?
Sure. So what I would say is that if you are thinking about what you have to do today or maybe 3 months from now, I would think, do you want to influence someone to stop doing something? Maybe you have a really difficult coworker, or you have a difficult friend or spouse or family member. We're about to get into the holidays. So if you want them to stop doing something, or if you want them to start doing something or repeat something, if ever you're at that, and I'll use the word crossroads again, if ever you're at that crossroads, I want you to stop and ask yourself, even if it's people who think different than you politically, when they say something, you get that trigger of, I don't like that, or I want them to move forward differently. You see the story first. You think back to what you know about them already. Where did they learn this? Did they have a bad experience that shaped this belief? Now they're totally against something because the only time they ever encountered it, it was bad. Or maybe you think if you want to approach a conversation, all along the way, you are asking very human questions of, if I wanted to have a difficult conversation with you, Kay, at 3 months from now, I would start building my wealth of knowledge about you so I could think like you. I would see the story. I would ask you things like, Kay, let's have coffee. When we have coffee, I would say, trying to get to know you better, Kay, get to know your story so I can be a better partner with you. Let's just talk about something. I'm thinking about hard conversations. If we ever need to have a hard conversation, I'm wondering how you'd want to do that. So when I think about these stories, this is the one and only time I say leaders speak first. But I would say, I'm going to share with you a story, Kay, about how I learned to handle difficult conversations. And then I would love to hear your story. And I might tell a story of, we didn't talk about it. Everything was swept under the rug. And you may say, that's wildly different than my family, Alyson. If there's a problem, boom, we hit it head on. And it was everyone fight for their position. And then we hugged it out and went our different ways. And right then and there, I can serve the need. It may be that I don't need to be timid about having a hard conversation with you. I need to step up and serve you the way you need to be served. I need to go have that hard conversation and not put it off for 3 months. So I would just say, if you're finished watching this, if ever you want to influence someone, the strategy is incredibly simple, yet profoundly impactful. Stop what you're doing, see the story. Figure out, where do they come from? What do they believe? What did they learn growing up? And then I want you to choose to take the action, not based on what you would do or what you would want, but based on what they need from you in order to say, yes, it's going forward.
That's a great point. You want to know their story. We all have stories, and that's one of the points we make in Uncopyable. You might have a service or a product or any of the other things that we talked about, but our stories are all unique. Nobody has the experience that you do. So taking the time to find that out will also make your moves feel special, but also give you the information that you can connect, empathize, and ultimately, in the right way, influence someone. And one last thing that comes to mind is when you influence somebody, it's when permission is granted by that person. So that's how you move from manipulation to influence in the right way.
Absolutely.
I highly recommend that you get to know Alyson. Buy one or both of her books. While you're at it, buy Uncopyable You. I will put all the links to connect with Alyson. She's also a phenomenal speaker, and so I'll put her website in the show notes as well. And seriously, Alyson, you are something really special. I appreciate so much you spending this time with me. So thank you so much.
I appreciate you, Kay. I'm wishing you and all your listeners incredible success.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Uncopyable Women in Business. If you enjoyed the show, you know the drill. Please like, share, rate, and review it on your favorite platform. See you next time, and always remember to be uncopyable.